At 11:47 a.m. Eastern Standard Time this morning, February 16, 2026, Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney stepped up to a podium at the National Press Theatre in Ottawa for what was billed as a routine economic update. What happened instead was 7 minutes and 32 seconds of the most devastating, most precise, and most publicly humiliating takedown of an American president that has ever been delivered by a foreign leader on live television. Carney didn't raise his voice. He didn't use insults. He didn't engage in theatrics. He simply laid out a series of facts, backed by documents, supported by data, that systematically dismantled every single claim Donald Trump has made about the tariff war, about American economic strength, and about Canada's supposed desperation to negotiate. And he did it while cameras from CNN, Fox News, BBC, and every major network in the world broadcast it live. Within minutes, the clip was trending #1 on every social media platform. Within an hour, the White House was scrambling to respond. Within 2 hours, financial markets were reacting to what analysts are calling the single most effective piece of economic diplomacy in modern history. This is the moment when Trump's entire strategy, the bluster, the threats, the assumption that Canada would fold under pressure, collapsed on live television in front of the entire world. In this deep dive, I'm going to walk you through exactly what Carney said and why it was so devastating. I'm going to show you the documents he released during the press conference that prove his claims and expose Trump's lies. I'm going to reveal the behind-the-scenes coordination between Canada and other world leaders that made this moment possible. I'm going to break down the immediate market reaction that shows global investors believe Carney, not Trump. And I'm going to explain why this press conference fundamentally shifts the balance of power in the North American trade war in a way that Trump may never recover from. Subscribe to join the community. Leave a comment so we can keep the conversation going, and share this video if it brought you value. Your support truly makes a difference. Let me set the stage, because the context matters. For the past 2 weeks, Donald Trump has been on a media blitz, claiming that Canada is on the verge of economic collapse, that Canadian officials are begging to negotiate, and that his tariffs are working exactly as intended. On Truth Social, he's posted dozens of times saying Canada can't survive without American markets, and that Carney will come crawling back within days. On Fox News interviews, he's claimed that Canada's counter-strike package is all talk, no action, and that American companies aren't actually relocating. His entire message has been that he's winning, Canada's losing, and it's only a matter of time before Canada surrenders. That narrative died this morning at 11:47 a.m. Carney walked into the press conference carrying a black leather folder. He placed it on the podium, opened it, and began speaking without notes. His tone was calm, almost professorial. He started by thanking the press for attending, and then said, "I want to address some statements that have been made by the President of the United States regarding Canada's economic position and our willingness to negotiate. I believe Canadians and Americans deserve to hear facts, not rhetoric. So, let me provide some facts." What followed was 7.5 minutes of absolute surgical precision. Carney went point by point through Trump's claims and methodically destroyed each one with data. First, he addressed Trump's claim that Canada is desperate to negotiate. Carney said, "President Trump has stated repeatedly that Canada cannot afford to lose access to the American market. Let me be clear. Canada suspended trade negotiations because we determined those negotiations were unproductive, not because we lack options. In the 72 hours since we suspended talks, Canada has received formal outreach from the European Union, Japan, South Korea, India, and Mexico, all expressing interest in expanded trade relationships. We have also received inquiries from 43 Fortune 500 companies based in the United States about relocating operations to Canada. These are not theoretical conversations. These are concrete proposals with timelines and investment figures. Canada is not desperate. Canada is choosing our partners. He then held up a document. The camera zoomed in, and you could see it was a letter on official European Commission letterhead. Carney said, "This letter, which I am releasing to the press after this conference, is from the President of the European Commission, confirming the EU's commitment to fast-track negotiations for expanded energy trade with Canada. The value of the proposed agreement is approximately $180 billion over 5 years. That is not a small market. That is a market larger than several U.S. sectors combined." He placed the letter down and picked up another document. This second letter is from Japan's Ministry of Economy, Trade, and Industry, confirming Japan's interest in long-term supply contracts for Canadian liquefied natural gas and critical minerals. The proposed value is $95 billion over 7 years. He placed that down and looked directly into the camera. So when President Trump says Canada has no options, he is either uninformed or he is misleading the American people. Canada has options. We are exercising those options, and we will continue to do so. Subscribe right now if you're starting to understand how devastating this is. Because Carney wasn't finished. He moved on to Trump's claim that American companies are not actually relocating to Canada, despite the incentives. Carney said, "President Trump has claimed that the corporate relocation offers Canada made are not being taken seriously. Let me provide some clarity." He held up another document. This is a signed memorandum of understanding between the Government of Ontario and Ford Motor Company, confirming Ford's commitment to relocate its North American headquarters to Toronto and invest $18 billion in Canadian facilities over the next 3 years. This is not a proposal. This is a binding agreement. Ford's CEO signed it 2 days ago. He placed it down and picked up another. This is a similar agreement with Johnson & Johnson, confirming their relocation to Vancouver with an investment of $12 billion. Also signed, also binding. Another document. This is Walmart's agreement with the government of Alberta. $25 billion in investment, signed. Carney paused and let that sink in. These are not empty threats. These are completed deals. The companies are moving. The jobs are moving. And President Trump can deny it all he wants. But the contracts are signed, the investments are committed, and the relocations are happening. Then Carney did something that was absolutely brutal. He addressed Trump's claim that Canada cannot survive without American oil and gas purchases. Carney smiled slightly, not in a mocking way, but in the way someone smiles when they're about to reveal information the other person doesn't know they have. He said, "President Trump has suggested that Canada needs the United States to buy our energy more than the United States needs to buy it. Let's examine that claim." He held up a chart. This chart shows U.S. crude oil imports by country. 60%, the majority, comes from Canada. The next largest supplier is Mexico at 7%. If Canada were to redirect even 20% of the oil we currently export to the United States toward other markets, refineries in the Midwest would face immediate shortages. Gasoline prices in Michigan, Ohio, and Pennsylvania would increase by an estimated 35 to 50% within 2 weeks. He placed the chart down. Now, President Trump might argue that the United States can buy oil from other countries. Let's talk about that. Venezuela's production capacity is a fraction of what it was a decade ago. Saudi Arabia prioritizes Asian markets. Russia is under sanctions. There is no readily available supply that can replace Canadian oil in the volumes the United States requires. The math is very simple. The United States imports approximately 3.8 million barrels per day from Canada. There is no other country that can provide that volume on short notice. None. Carney then pulled out another document. This is an analysis prepared by the U.S. Energy Information Administration, a U.S. government agency, not a Canadian one. It was published 6 months ago. It concludes, and I quote, that the United States' energy security is heavily dependent on Canadian supply, and that any disruption to Canadian imports would result in significant price volatility and potential shortages in key regions. That is not my opinion. That is the assessment of President Trump's own government. He placed the document down and looked directly at the camera again. So when President Trump says Canada needs the U.S. more than the U.S. needs Canada, he is contradicting his own experts. The room was silent. You could hear reporters typing frantically. Carney wasn't done. He moved to Trump's claim that the tariffs are protecting American jobs. Carney said, President Trump has justified his tariffs by claiming they will bring manufacturing jobs back to the United States. I want to address that directly because it affects American workers, and they deserve to know the truth. He held up another chart. This chart shows employment in the U.S. automotive sector over the past 3 months. Since the tariffs were implemented on February 1st, the U.S. automotive sector has lost 14,200 jobs. Not gained, lost. These are layoffs at parts suppliers, at logistics companies, at factories that depend on cross-border supply chains. Meanwhile, Canada's automotive sector has added 8,900 jobs in the same period, as companies shift production north to avoid the tariffs. He placed the chart down and picked up another document. This is a report from the United Auto Workers Union released yesterday. It states that UAW locals in Michigan and Ohio are reporting increased layoff notices and that union leadership is, quote, deeply concerned about the impact of current trade policies on American workers. The union is not blaming Canada. The union is blaming the tariffs. Carney paused. I want to be very clear about something. Canada does not want American workers to lose their jobs. We do not celebrate economic hardship in the United States, but we will not accept responsibility for the consequences of policies we did not create and policies we warned against. President Trump was told by his own advisors, by industry leaders, by labor unions that these tariffs would hurt American workers. He implemented them anyway, and now American workers are paying the price. Then Carney delivered what might have been the most devastating line of the entire press conference. He closed the folder, placed both hands on the podium, and said, President Trump has characterized Canada as weak, as desperate, and as dependent on American goodwill. I want to address that directly. Canada is not weak. Canada is the 10th largest economy in the world. We are a G7 nation. We have the 3rd largest oil reserves on the planet. We have a highly educated workforce. world-class infrastructure, and trade agreements with 51 countries. We are not a client state. We are not a subordinate. We are a sovereign nation, and we will be treated as such. If President Trump wishes to treat Canada as a partner, we are ready to partner. If he wishes to treat Canada as an adversary, we are prepared for that as well. But what we will not do is accept disrespect, accept false claims, or accept policies that harm both our countries while President Trump pretends they are working. The choice is his. Canada has made our position clear. And with that, Carney thanked the press and walked off the stage. No questions, no follow-up. He delivered his message and left. The entire press corps sat stunned for several seconds before erupting into shouted questions that went unanswered. Let me show you the receipts that prove Carney's claims and explain why this was so effective. Receipt number 1. The documents are real. Within 30 minutes of the press conference ending, the Canadian government posted all the documents Carney referenced on an official website. The EU letter confirming trade talks, verified and authentic. The Japan energy proposal, verified and authentic. The Ford, Johnson & Johnson, and Walmart agreements, all verified and authentic, with signatures and dates. The U.S. Energy Information Administration report, publicly available on the U.S. government website. The UAW statement, published on the union's official site. Every single claim Carney made was backed by a document that reporters could immediately verify. This wasn't spin. This wasn't propaganda. This was a politician showing his receipts in real time on live television, and none of it could be disputed. Receipt number 2. The market believed him. Within 45 minutes of Carney's press conference ending, U.S. energy stocks dropped another 7% as traders realized Canada's threats about oil export restrictions are credible and backed by real alternative buyers. Canadian stocks, meanwhile, surged. The Toronto Stock Exchange jumped 3.1% in afternoon trading. The Canadian dollar strengthened another 1.8% against the U.S. dollar. Currency traders are betting that Canada's economy is about to benefit enormously from the collapse of U.S.-Canada trade, while the U.S. economy suffers. The market doesn't lie. The market watched Carney's press conference, looked at the documents, ran the numbers, and decided Canada is winning this fight. Receipt number 3. The international reaction. Within 2 hours of the press conference, leaders and officials from multiple countries issued statements supporting Canada's position. The European Union's Trade Commissioner said the EU stands with Canada in defense of rules-based trade. Japan's Foreign Ministry said Japan values its partnership with Canada and looks forward to deepening economic ties. Mexico's president said, Mexico understands Canada's frustration and shares concerns about unilateral trade actions. This is unprecedented. Major U.S. allies are publicly siding with Canada against the United States. That doesn't happen unless those countries believe the U.S. is in the wrong and Canada is in the right. Carney's press conference gave international leaders the political cover to openly support Canada because he made the case so clearly and backed it with so much evidence that disagreeing with him would mean defending the indefensible. Receipt number 4. The White House has no response. This is the most telling receipt of all. It has now been over 4 hours since Carney's press conference, and the White House has not issued a substantive response. Trump posted on Truth Social calling Carney a loser and saying Canada is lying as usual. But he provided no counter-evidence, No documents, no data, just insults. The White House press secretary was asked about Carney's claims in the daily briefing, and she said only that the president stands by his policies and refused to address any of the specific documents or data Carney presented. That tells you everything. The White House has no rebuttal because there is no rebuttal. Carney didn't give opinions. He showed contracts, letters, and government reports. You can't spin your way out of signed documents. Here's why this moment is so significant beyond just the immediate embarrassment to Trump. Carney didn't just win a news cycle. He fundamentally shifted the narrative of this entire trade war. For 2 weeks, Trump has controlled the story. He's been on offense, claiming strength, claiming victory, setting the terms of the debate. Carney just flipped that completely. Now, the narrative is that Trump lied that Canada has all the leverage, that American companies and American allies are abandoning the U.S., and that Trump's policies are failing. And because Carney backed every claim with verifiable evidence, that narrative is going to stick. Trump can deny it, but he can't disprove it. And in politics and in markets, once you lose control of the narrative, it's almost impossible to get it back. Let me give you 3 scenarios for where this goes after today's humiliation. Scenario 1, the forced retreat. Trump's political advisors convince him that Carney's press conference was a disaster and that continuing the current course will destroy Republican chances in the 2026 midterms. Within a week, Trump announces a pause in the tariff implementation to allow time for good-faith negotiations. He doesn't admit defeat, but he quietly backs down. Carney agrees to resume talks, but only on Canada's terms. Trump loses, but he gets to save some face by claiming it was always about negotiation. Scenario 2, the doubling down. Trump's ego won't let him admit Carney embarrassed him, so he escalates. He imposes additional tariffs, threatens to cut off all trade with Canada, maybe even threatens military action on the border to secure American interests. This is the dangerous scenario where Trump's need to appear strong overrides rational policy. Markets collapse further. Allies distance themselves even more. The crisis spirals completely out of control. Scenario 3, the isolation. Trump doesn't back down, but he doesn't escalate either. He just ignores Carney and pretends the press conference didn't happen. But the damage is done. International leaders saw Carney's evidence. Investors saw the documents. American companies saw the signed relocation agreements. Canada continues building alternative trade relationships. U.S. allies continue siding with Canada. Trump becomes increasingly isolated, presiding over an economy that's suffering, while he insists everything is fine. This is the scenario where Trump doesn't lose in one dramatic moment. He just slowly becomes irrelevant as the world moves on without him. I'm watching 3 things. First, does Trump respond with actual evidence, or does he just keep insulting Carney? If he can't provide counter documents, everyone knows Carney was telling the truth. Second, do any Republican senators publicly acknowledge that Carney made valid points? If GOP lawmakers start breaking ranks, Trump's position becomes untenable. Third, do gas prices spike this week? If they do, it proves Carney's warnings about oil supply were accurate, and Trump loses all credibility. This press conference was a masterclass in political communication. Carney was calm, factual, and devastating. He didn't attack Trump personally. He attacked Trump's policies with evidence. And in doing so, he humiliated Trump more effectively than any insult ever could. Subscribe and turn on notifications, because the fallout from this is just beginning. And how Trump responds in the next 48 hours will determine whether he can salvage anything from this disaster, or whether Carney just ended Trump's trade war in 7 minutes and 32 seconds.